The tragic incident in skydiving history mainly occurred due to a small mistake. This became apparent when 18 skydivers had already jumped from the plane and there was no turning back. After jumping from the plane, the excitement of all 18 skydivers turned into fear. They were all experienced skydivers, but unfortunately, their years of experience were of no use here. Out of the 18, 16 died, but the story told by the 2 survivors who managed to live was hair-raising. Viewers, this incident is remembered today as the Lake Erie disaster. Lake Erie is the 4th largest lake in North America and the 11th largest globally, located in the state of Ohio, USA. South of Lake Erie, about 13 kilometers away, there is a small airfield named Ortner Airport. On August 27, 1967, 30 skydivers arrived at this airport because they were offered a free flight. A B-25 bomber plane from World War II, modified by a private company, had offered these skydivers the free flight. As the skydivers started boarding the B-25 bomber, space became limited. Due to concerns about overweight, the pilot ultimately selected only 20 divers at the last moment. This selection was based on the divers' experience and skill level. The remaining 10 divers who were not selected felt disappointed, not knowing that the pilot's decision would save their lives. The plan was for the B-25 bomber to take off from Ortner Airport, climb to 20,000 feet while circling, and then drop 18 divers above the same airport. After that, it would climb further, and the last 2 divers would jump from 30,000 feet. All these divers were supposed to land back at Ortner Airport using parachutes. Due to bad weather, the flight couldn't take off in the morning, but managed to do so at 3 p.m. All the divers were very excited, as not only were they getting a free flight, but it was also their first experience jumping from a bomber plane. After the B-25 took off, a small Cessna 180 plane also took off from the same airport. It was supposed to stay at an altitude of 12,000 feet and capture the divers' jumps on camera. Meanwhile, the B-25 carrying the divers was climbing upwards in a spiral due to the bad weather. Both the pilots of the planes were in contact with the nearby air traffic control tower, which was providing them with their locations. After an hour, the B-25 bomber reached an altitude of 20,000 feet. The pilot contacted the control tower to confirm their location. Back then, GPS technology wasn't available, so pilots had to rely on control towers for navigation, especially in bad weather. The control tower informed the B-25 pilot that they were 9 kilometers away from Ortner Airport, and based on this information, the location of the B-25 was approximately at this point. A minute later, the Cessna 180 pilot also contacted the air traffic controller to ask for their position relative to the B-25, as the Cessna pilot couldn't see the bomber due to the bad weather. The air traffic controller told the Cessna pilot that they were 9 kilometers behind the B-25. So if the B-25 was 9 kilometers away from the Ortner airfield, then the Cessna was 9 kilometers behind the B-25 and approximately 18 kilometers away from Ortner Airport. A few minutes later, at an altitude of 20,000 feet, the B-25 pilot again confirmed their location and was informed that they were now directly above Ortner Airport. On this signal, the pilot gave the 18 skydivers the signal to jump. The small mistake that would cost the skydivers their lives had already been made, but nobody knew at that time. At that altitude, the temperature was 30 degrees Celsius, so all the skydivers wore an extra layer of jumpsuits. They all jumped from the B-25 simultaneously to form a formation during the free fall. At that moment, they only saw a layer of clouds below them, intending to deploy their parachutes after crossing this layer. They were enjoying their free fall, but when they crossed the thick cloud layer, their excitement turned into fear. They saw not land below them, but the deep waters of Lake Erie. They were at an altitude of about 3,000 feet and immediately deployed their parachutes, hoping to land near the lake's edge on land. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. The place where they landed in the water was at least 10 kilometers away from the land. They thought they could quickly remove their harnesses after landing in the water and wait for rescue by swimming. However, the heavy layers of warm clothing they wore made it impossible for them to stay afloat. Only 2 divers had removed their shoes and excess weight before landing. They were the only ones who managed to swim for a while and were later rescued. Sadly, the remaining 16 divers couldn't be saved, and their bodies weren't found for several days. The last body was recovered a week later. This disaster made headlines worldwide, and an investigation team was set up to find out what went wrong and where the B-25 had dropped them. The air traffic controller claimed that when the B-25 dropped the skydivers, they were overland, 10 kilometers inside from Lake Erie, above Ortner Airport. They believed that strong winds had drifted the skydivers to Lake Erie. However, this could also mean that the winds had drifted the skydivers a total of 20 kilometers, 10 kilometers from Ortner Airport to Lake Erie, and another 10 kilometers inside the lake. When experts conducted rough calculations based on the wind speed and altitude of the dive, they found that the divers could have drifted a maximum of 5 kilometers, indicating a discrepancy in the air traffic controller's statement. Both the pilots of the B-25 and Cessna claimed that they were given incorrect locations. The investigation revealed that when the pilots had contacted the ATC for their locations, there was a shift change among the controllers. The new controller gave the B-25 pilot the Cessna's location. So when the B-25 pilot was told they were over Ortner Airport, it was actually the Cessna 180 that was there, and the B-25 was over Lake Erie. Additionally, both the divers and pilot made the mistake of jumping without visual confirmation of the target, violating aviation laws. In memory of the 16 pilots, for the next 2 years, other skydivers deliberately landed in Lake Erie wearing floating equipment. In 1972, the court held the FAA responsible for the death of the 16 skydivers, and the B-25 pilot's license was suspended permanently. Furthermore, a rule was established that skydivers must drop at least 50 kilometers away from any water body.